So what happens when a trader who has made millions of dollars loses almost 1 million of it in a single hour? This is an incredible story about hitting absolute rock bottom and the really unlikely and painful path he took to rebuild not just his bank account, but his entire mind.
Right, so picture this. This is the trader we're talking about. On one hand, you've got this verified, massive success, over $6 million in profits. And on the other hand, a catastrophic, nearly career-ending loss. How can both of these things possibly be true for the same person? And that, right there, that's the real question. See, this isn't just a story about bouncing back. It's about using a failure that devastating as the actual foundation for becoming even better. The how and the why, that's where the real lesson is. Okay, so to really understand the comeback, you have to understand the collapse. And what is just staggering is the speed, the sheer severity of how it all just completely unraveled.
Here's the number, the damage from just one single trade. A loss of $850,000. Just gone.
And to put that into perspective for you, that one trade wiped out nearly 40% of his entire capital. This wasn't just a bad day at the office, you know? This was the kind of loss that could have, and probably should have, ended his career right then and there.
And this might be the most shocking part of all. This entire financial disaster went down in just 60 minutes. It's just a terrifying reminder of how fast things can spiral completely out of control.
Now, so important to get this next part. This wasn't a bad strategy. The system he was using was totally sound. The failure was 100% psychological. The person running the system simply broke all of his own rules.
And look, he was brutally honest about what happened. He admitted he just froze, a deer in the headlights. He got arrogant, believed he was too good for safety nets like a max loss rule. Hubris took over, he ditched his plan, and just started hoping, praying the trade would turn around. It was a complete and total psychological breakdown.
So, how on earth do you rebuild from that? I mean, where do you even start?
Well, this is where the story takes a really wild turn. To get back to mental strength needed to trade millions, the answer wasn't in some trading book. Bizarrely, it was in burpees. His mentor, a guy named Tim Sykes, gave him this really unconventional challenge, and it was tied to a separate loss of over $89,000. The challenge wasn't about trading, it was physical. He had to do 1 burpee for every single dollar he lost.
Yeah, just let that number sink in for a second. That works out to about 250 burpees every single day for almost a full year. This wasn't just a workout plan. This was a public promise he couldn't break, a physical price he had to pay for his mental failure.
And the process worked in basically 3 stages. First, making that promise public created massive accountability. Second, the daily grind, doing them no matter what, on a cruise at 2 a.m., it forged an unbreakable habit. And finally, that physical consistency started to translate directly into mental discipline. He was literally rewiring his brain through his body.
The burpees pretty much became a metaphor for everything. The thinking was, if he could force himself to do 250 burpees at 2 in the morning after a long hike, well, then he could absolutely force himself to cut a losing trade no matter how much his ego was screaming not to. The promise he made became the system.
In this whole crazy experience, it really revealed a much deeper truth. Discipline isn't something you can just turn on and off for work. The habits you build in your everyday life, they directly impact your performance when the stakes are high.
It really boils down to 2 different feedback loops. You've got the undisciplined loop, poor habits, bad sleep, always chasing the next quick hit. That leads to random emotional trades, which leads to, well, huge losses. But then there's the disciplined loop. Good habits, focus, planned trades, and consistent results. One spirals you down, the other spirals you up.
You see, high performance is really like a pyramid. The big success you see at the very top is built on a huge foundation of seemingly boring, unrelated habits. A strict bedtime, hitting the gym, eating well. These aren't optional extras. They are the absolute bedrock of the mental focus you need to win.
And this whole lesson about discipline, it actually helps explain something we saw happen pretty recently. Back in the hot market of 2020, a ton of new traders got really lucky. But you know what? Very few of them are actually still in the game today. Why is that?
Well, it really comes down to this key difference. The lucky trader confused a rising tide with their own skill. They thought they were a genius, so they stopped learning. But the survivor,
The survivor recognized they got lucky and immediately got serious because they knew the easy times wouldn't last forever.
So the playbook for actually surviving is pretty clear. It's about studying relentlessly, adapting when things change, and maybe most important of all, building those systems, like a max loss rule or a crazy burpee challenge, to protect yourself from your own worst instincts.
And that, right there, that is really the heart of this whole thing. A hot market might get you in the door, give you a shot, but it's the invisible work, the daily grind, the disciplined habits that let you stay in the room and build a real career.
So in the end, after all the chaos, the massive loss, and the tens of thousands of burpees, the trader's perspective is just one of gratitude. He doesn't measure himself against other traders anymore, but against where he started, with just $2,000. That journey makes all the struggle worth it.
So, we'll leave you with this thought. It's so easy to blame outside forces when we fail. The market, the economy, just bad luck. But this story, it forces us to ask a much harder question. What if our biggest enemy isn't out there? What if it's the person looking back at us in the mirror?